Good afternoon. I am Ellen Helmerson, Chairwoman of AUSA Army Civilian Advisory Committee. On behalf of General Carter Ham, President of AUSA, and the Council of Trustees, I welcome you to the 2020 Army Civilian Forum. The forum is focused on the time is now for Army civilian talent management. As our keynote speaker, we are very fortunate to have their Honorable Dr. Casey Wardynski, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, is joining us. Dr. Wardynski is a strong advocate for our Army professionals, to include our Army civilians. As the Army Assistant Secretary, he sets strategic direction, develops policies, allocates resources, and supervises all matters pertaining to Manpower and Reserve Affairs to sustain and position the Army for the future. Last year at AUSA, Dr. Wardynski and the Army leadership unveiled the Army People Strategy. We are excited that he's here with us again this year to talk to us about continued Army People Strategy and civilian talent management efforts. Welcome, Dr. Wardynski.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank AUSA and General Ham for sponsoring today's forum on the civilian workforce. I'd also like to thank Ms. Helmerson for being our moderator today. I wanted to kick off this forum today by discussing a little bit about where we've come since last fall. Last fall, we introduced the topic of the Army People Strategy at our civilian forum and talked about where we'd be going over the coming year. Well, a year's gone by, and so I'd like to circle back and talk to folks here today in broad terms about what's happened in the last year, and then foreshadow a little bit what our panelists are going to talk about today. We've got Dr. Four, who's going to talk in greater detail about the Army People Strategy, and particularly the Civilian Implementing Plan. We got Mr. Formica, who's going to talk about the developed line of effort that fits within that implementing plan. We've got Carol Burton, and she'll be talking to us about how we're going to acquire civilian talent, how we're going to manage it, how we're going to put it to work, or what we call employ. And we've got Mr. Beach, who's going to talk to us about how we're going to build a diverse workforce of talent. So let me begin by just taking us back a year. Last year in August, senior leaders signed off on the Army's first people strategy. It's about a 14-page document. It talks about some key things. We call those our key enablers. It talks about the way forward. We call those lines of effort. And it talks about outcomes we seek. And so the outcomes are very easy. We know that winning matters. This is an Army, and we're charged with winning the nation's wars. And the way we do that is by building cohesive teams. So the outcome that we seek in our strategy is an Army of cohesive teams. And to get there, we look across 4 lines of effort that talk about acquiring talent, developing that talent, employing it, and keeping it. And then that builds on some key aspects. The most important for our discussion today would be culture. Army culture that focuses on how we go about building our diverse teams, our cohesive teams, and that is we approach them with the idea that people bring unique gifts to the Army, that we want to treat them all fairly. We want to put them on a level playing ground in terms of being able to put their talents to work in support of the nation's defense, and we want to put them in career fields where they have the maximum potential to serve at the highest levels at which they can deliver value for the United States Army. So that was the broad strokes of where we were headed at that point. That 14 pages talks about those lines of effort, who's responsible for them, who's responsible for building culture, and how we plan to govern the activities under these lines of effort. Well, the first thing to take note of is you might say, well, it's 14 pages, how important can it be? Well, I can tell you it's pretty important because it's already driven in FY22 $56 million of new spending on our civilian employee programs that will help us acquire, develop, employ, and retain approximately 300,000 civilians across the United States and around the world. Carol Burton and her team have already done a great deal of work putting this plan into action under the implementing plan devised by Dr. Four and his team. That implementing plan was signed off. It is now published and it's in force. It's guiding how we're going to allocate resources, how we're going to structure our organizations, and how we're going to proceed into the future across those 4 lines of effort. And so Carol will be talking to in just a few minutes about what's going on in her organization, the Civilian Human Resources Agency, how it's being reorganized, how career fields are being structured to provide our employees with world-class leaders, strong professional development for their supervisors, career fields in which all of our employees have potential to rise to the top of the Army, rise to their maximum potential to serve. Mr. Formica will be talking about how we plan to develop these supervisors and develop our workforce. And then, of course, Mr. Beach will be talking to you about how we bring everybody to the table, how we bring diverse talent across our organization, across our career fields, in each of those different lines of effort, whether they be acquire, develop, employ, or retain. So a great deal is going on. It's a pretty exciting time. I can't think of another time where this much effort's gone into building a strong civilian workforce, building strong developmental pathways, organizing and resourcing for success, so that an employee can enter at any point with the potential now to rise to the top of the organization, and so that the Army is positioned to be very nimble and competitive in acquiring talent. Each of our organizations, and particularly several, such as Army Futures Command, Army Materiel Command, Training and Doctrine Command, the Corps of Engineers, headquarters, they're very reliant on having an effective civilian workforce and being able to fill vacancies with very talented folks in an expeditious manner. So as you listen to Carol talk about the acquire piece, I invite you to take note of the fact that great strides have already been made in terms of making the Army more nimble. So with that said, I won't go into any further detail. Suffice to note that the strategy is in place. It was signed by the Chief of Staff and the Secretary last year. The implementing plan was signed this summer and has already gone into effect. A great many actions are underway and will continue underway in the coming years. Resources in the Army programming is now being driven by the implementing plan and the strategy, with key ideas of having a very strong civilian workforce, nimble practices that allow our folks to serve where their talents will take them, and so that we have the right civilian at the right place at the right time, and so that we can also bridge the divide that's existed between the military side of our personnel practices and our civilian side of our personnel practices. We're in with the goal of building greater permeability between the military as folks leave, whether they separate after an initial enlistment or whether it's at retirement, to bring their talents to bear as appropriate in the civilian workforce as well. So with that, I'm going to close my remarks and invite you to pay close attention to Ms. Burton, Mr. Formica, Dr. Beach, and Dr. Four as they take you through the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wardzinski, for joining us today.
Today, we also have our panel that will further discuss the time is now for Army civilian talent management and share their functional perspectives on topics related to Army people strategy and the 4 strategic outcomes of ready, diverse, professional, and integrated, and how the Army plans to customize, modernize, and apply talent management to every segment of the civilian workforce. I am honored to facilitate this discussion today. So I would love to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Todd Four, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, Civilian Personnel, Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Our next panelist is Mr. Anselm Beach, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Equity and Inclusion Agency, Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Our third panelist is Mr. Michael Formica, the Deputy to the Commanding General, Combined Arms Center, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And our fourth panelist is Ms. Carol Burton, Director of the Civilian Human Resources Agency, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. So first, we're going to start and hear from Dr. Four on the Army People Strategic Outcome of READY.
Hello, and thanks for joining us on this session. And Ellen, I appreciate the introduction and also appreciate AUSA in having this event. So it's very important that we made a lot of progress, and this is one of the ways that we are getting the word out, and we appreciate ASUA's help. So let me start by going back and talking about the fact that the Army People Strategy was just published a year ago. In fact, it was rolled out at AUSA. And just 7 months later, in May, Dr. Wardynski and the G1 signed the Civilian Implementation Plan. We had about 250 plus people that were working on the plan, different SMEs in different areas. And so we're greatly, greatly appreciative of everyone's time and effort in being able to put the Civilian Implementation Plan together so quickly. And let me cover a couple of the fine points here. The CIP recognizes that the civilians are a critical part of the readiness of the Army, and that talent must be developed across the human capital life cycle. That life cycle being that of develop, employ, retain, and many other aspects that support the implementation plan. Every step is taken toward realizing the priorities of the implementation plan, and it is one step closer to achieving the future of the talent that we are seeking in our civilian corps. The civilian implementation plan supports the Army People Strategy, where our civilians are part of the team and making sure that we have the ready force that we need to support our combatant commanders. Developing the Army Civilian Corps into the future is a strategic Army level responsibility and opportunity. Army leaders are fully committed to their civilian workforce and investing in its future to fully recognize their potential as an integral part of the Army team. In fact, if you remember back to Dr. Wardynski's comments, he said the Army has already committed over $50 million in developing the talent management system and processes and the investment in our people. Army civilians are critical to the readiness, and we're committed to making sure that those civilians are having all the talent, all the skills, all the capabilities they need to make sure that we, the Army, succeed in our mission. Dr. Wardynski also mentioned cohesive teams. That's what we're shooting for. What are we doing? Our civilian talent management transformation will exponentially improve our ability to acquire, develop, employ, and retain top talent. We are modernizing our processes and systems to leverage data-driven insights to ensure that the Army Civilian Corps is ready, professional, diverse, and integrated. Why are we doing this? The Army must remain ready as the world's premier military force. Our people are our greatest assets and resources. How will we implement this? The Civilian Implementation Plan has 4 overarching priorities: to transform the workforce planning and management, to modernize civilian talent, to evolve career programs to be an integral part of the Army enterprise, and to build world-class leaders. The plan is organized by 4 lines of effort: the acquire, develop, employ, and retain. Each LOE is utilizing work groups, leveraging subject matter experts, and fostering innovative thinking to execute tasks and actions. The Army must remain ready as the world's premier combat force. That readiness is strengthened by the people who comprise the total Army force, including its nearly 300,000 civilians. After all, equipment does not learn, understand, innovate, build cohesive teams, or exercise judgment. People do. The Army of 2028 will be ready because it has the capacity to place the right civilian in the right job at the right time. To achieve this vision, we are now putting the right people, the right policies, and the right systems in place to build toward our future. Let me talk about the CIP priorities for a moment. Transforming work is the first priority, and our workforce is important in the infrastructure that we have to make sure that we have workforce planning in place. The Army will project requirements for both people and specific skills to reduce the capabilities gaps that we have, and we will match talent to those requirements. Our second priority is to modernize civilian talent acquisition. The Army will have a deliberate approach for marketing for the jobs that we have available, targeting the required skill sets identified from strategic workforce planning, and hiring them through efficient processes, as well as efficiently bringing them on board. Our third priority is evolving career programs to be an integral part of the people enterprise. Just earlier this month, we actually did the ribbon cutting on the organization that will spearhead that specific career program evolution. And then lastly, building world-class supervisors. As we know from our feds data, your first line supervisor is your best connection to making the mission happen for you, and so you understand what your role is. So we have a goal to create a world-class supervisor force for all civilians and military supervisors of civilians. The Army will create the infrastructure and grow and sustain the best supervisors in government at all levels within the Army. And we will certify supervisors to perform their roles effectively. So these priorities all focus on the Army People Strategy and the lines of efforts on what is the most important to the Army Civilian Corps. So Ellen, I appreciate you hosting the session. And that is the overview of where we are with the Army People Strategy and its civilian implementation plan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foer. I am now going to turn this over to Mr. Beach on the Army People Strategic Outcome of Diverse.
Hi, good morning, and it's an honor to be here at AUSA to share some thoughts on the Army's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let me start out by saying that the tenets of equity and inclusion are fundamental to the Army's people strategy. You may ask why, and I'd give you two quick reasons. One, we are in a competition for talent. The second thing is that it drives readiness. So what is our approach? Our approach really is to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into the Army people strategy using the Army Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Annex. This annex is a 5-year plan with 5 goals and 25 objectives with over 100 tasks. It's important to realize that this is a 5-year plan because it seems in the current conversations, people think about plans as very expedient and kind of immediate results. So we want to have this in this kind of timeline because it provides us with the ability to measure and provides us with timelines so we could remove systemic barriers to create equitable outcomes, which is crucial for closing the gap in ascension and retention of diverse talent. I mentioned that the plan has 5 goals, and I want to quickly talk about what these 5 goals are. Goal 1 is to ensure that there's leader commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion practices at all levels. Goal number 2 is to institutionalize talent management. Dr. Wardinsky talked a lot about talent management. My colleague, Todd Foer, also talked about talent management. And so we really focus on how we acquire, develop, employ, and retain a high-performing workforce. Goal number 3 focuses on establishing a governance for the Army diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and that would be through a diversity council. Goal number 4 is really looking at how do we provide training and education to make sure that we are meeting the demands of the total workforce. So last goal, number 5, is to ensure that there is equitable and inclusive environment where diverse experiences, cultures could be ensured to have mission readiness. Lastly, I would say that this is not something that's new for the Army. It really builds off the 2008 Diversity Task Force that created the 2011 diversity roadmaps. So what is really different is that this is not a standalone process anymore. It is now integrated into the Army People Strategy. And by integrated into the Army People Strategy, it really provides one pathway for all the Army's efforts in ensuring that we have the talent that's ready for a 21st century Army and a 21st century workforce so that we can make the demands for the future and the current needs to fight and win the nation's wars. So with that, I simply want to say thank you very much for the opportunity. Again, it's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Beach. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Formica on the Army People Strategic Outcome of Professional.
Thanks, Ellen, for the introduction, and I also want to thank AUSA for hosting this event. It's great to be a member of this panel and provide an update on the Army's and TRADOC's efforts in support of professionalism. My remarks focus on two topics: our civilian education system and world-class supervisor training, both of which support the Army's People Strategy, Civilian Implementation Plan, Line of Effort 2, Develop Talent. Fundamental to this discussion is the role of the Army Management Staff College, which educates and develops the Army Civilian Corps for leadership and management responsibilities, and throughout the Army, and serves as the executive agent for the Army Civilian Education System. AMSC delivers several leadership courses: a 2-week basic course for GS grades 5 through 9 and NAF equivalents, a 3-week intermediate course for GS grades 10 through 12 and NAF equivalents, and a 4-week advanced course for GS grades 13 through 15 and NAF equivalents. The college also offers courses in strategic leadership, information advantage, and business transformation as part of its continuing education for senior leaders. These courses are for Army civilians in grades GS 13 through 15, lieutenant colonels, and sergeants major. The Army Pandemic Response mandates that AMSC deliver all CES courses virtually during the first and second quarters of this fiscal year. Beyond that, AMSC will adopt a hybrid CES delivery model consisting of 3 elements to make it easier for Army civilian professionals and their organizations to support their attendance to this critical education. We will use virtual classroom courseware, mobile education teams delivering at points of needs, and/or resident courses here at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. To support the Army as it transforms to become multi-domain operations capable, General Funk, the commanding general of Training and Doctrine Command, directed AMSC to prepare Army Civilian Corps leaders to meet this challenge. As such, AMSC is adding 5 subject matter experts to its faculty: an expert in cyber, an expert in social media, an expert in electronic warfare, an expert in autonomous systems, and an expert in artificial intelligence / machine learning and big data disciplines. Finally, as he did for the Army's 3 uniformed cohorts of officer, NCO, and warrant, Lieutenant General Rainey, the Commanding General Combined Arms Center, directed AMSC to field a program by 4th quarter of this fiscal year that will enable Army civilian leaders, while participating in the CES courses, to assess their knowledge, skills, and behaviors. This work nests with the Civilian Implementation Plan, Lines of Effort 2, Develop Talent, and 3, Employ Talent. These longitudinal assessments will support an Army civilian's development, not in a predictive fashion, but rather as a means to generate value-added feedback to improve self-awareness and informed, focused self-development. Also in this fiscal year, Combined Arms Center will develop a Cognitive Improvement Center, which will enable Army civilians to improve those areas that they've learned from these assessments. I'll now turn to our second topic, world-class supervisor training. AMSC is redesigning the supervisor development course for 3rd quarter of this year, as well as leading an operational planning team pursuing 3 objectives scheduled for completion in either 3rd or 4th quarter of this fiscal year. Objective number 1 is to establish a supervisor auto-enrollment capability. Objective number 2 is to create 2 new supervisor development courses to complement the supervisor development course. First will be an online Supervisor 101 course to be completed within 30 days of his or her first supervisory assignment, and in conjunction with CHARA, a resident Supervisor Human Resources Orientation course delivered locally at our camps, posts, and stations by the CPACs. Objective number 3 will be to create a Supervisor Development Common Operating Picture. This picture will enable the enterprise to track the completion of these critical tasks that I've identified above. Finally, I want to focus for a moment on the value of our civilian education system as it impacts the Army civilian professional. The fiscal year 20 survey of Army Learning Enterprises assessed the CES instruction from 2017 to 2019. Recent CES graduates provided overwhelming positive assessments of their education experience. Notably, CES courses were among the most favorably rated across the survey indicators and are perceived as being of good quality, conducted with effective instruction and facilitation, and providing a favorable level of rigor. Bottom line, AMSC has a broad customer base, unique student demographic, and instructional ability to instill and reinforce the professionalism of the Army Civilian Corps' character, competence, and commitment. As such, the AMSC's blended delivery approach and efforts to improve the Supervisor Development Course program, combined with the Army's increased investment in the civilian education system, are critical to improving attendance of the Army Civilian Corps and the Army Civilian Corps' professionalism and total Army readiness. I'll close now and thank you again for your support of the Army Civilian Development, and I look forward to continuing our journey to become the Army Civilian Corps our nation expects and our Army deserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Formica. Now we have Ms. Burton to discuss the Army People Strategic Outcome of Integrated.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Burton, the Director of the Civilian Human Resource Agency, the brand new home for Army's civilian career programs, responsible for the integration of talent management. Today, I'll focus my remarks on Army's career programs and the significant transformation that is underway. But first, just a little bit of background information. What we have today, 32 career programs, are functional communities such as supply, logistics, EEO, and manpower. And career programs provide a wide variety of functions, including strategic human capital management and training and development. When Dr. Wadinsky spoke a few minutes ago about the people strategy in building a 21st century talent management system, he made a point of focusing on how the Army will improve how we acquire, develop, employ, and retain our people. The Civilian Implementation Plan identifies transformation of our career programs as one of the 4 priorities of the civilian workforce. Specifically, we're tasked to evolve career programs to focus on an enterprise-wide talent management system. And to do that, we need to get better and integrate our career management efforts. In July of this year, the Army directed the realignment of the career programs to CHARA on 1 October, and I'm proud to announce that that task is complete. And in fact, in that short time, we've realigned the people, the funding, and the force structure from 32 different career programs to CHARA and established the Army Civilian Career Management Activity, or ACMA. So why create ACMA? As I mentioned, we're realigning all the career programs under the CHARA umbrella to integrate the career management operations. And we'll group career programs into focused career fields to enable Army civilians to obtain experience across broad functional areas. These last 2 notes are very important. We'll establish an Operations and Plans Office to provide enterprise-wide program management rather than having that work done in 32 different offices. And we'll centralize the transactional tasks in a support office to better enable the career fields to focus on core tasks. We're focused on talent management because talent management is people, and people are our greatest asset. We want to meet the challenges of tomorrow. So we will transform the Army Civilian Career Management to acquire, develop, employ, and retain the diversity of civilian talent needed to achieve total Army readiness. Thank you so much for attending this panel discussion today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Burton. Well, next, I will be sharing questions with our outstanding panel members to gain ideas, insight, and knowledge. And we're going to start with Dr. Four. With the Civilian Implementation Plan in support of the Army People Strategy, how are you managing such significant change?
Alan, that is a fantastic question. Let me start by saying that we have a strategic change management plan that involves the communication strategy. We're looking at print, digital, and in-person. And so we have already started, actually, because we have our printed material that we'll actually have out there. And then we'll also, actually, we've already started the digital. Carol Burton sends out just about weekly now a communication tool that is much like a one-pager, so you can kind of get it really quick and understand what's going on. And it starts to explain what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and what it means to you, the civilian. And so the print and the digital we are working on today. The in-person, because of COVID, it's been a little bit more challenging, but as we have opportunities and as the different leaders across the ACMA organization that Carol had just mentioned, we will start using in-person or team-style communication opportunities. We'll be able to record those so that people can play them at a later date, but they will be focused specifically on why, how, and what the opportunities are and ways that people can actually get involved.
Great, thank you. So, Mr. Beach, what does diversity mean to the United States Army?
And that is a fantastic question, and I'm so glad that you asked it. Because in so many ways we have heard about diversity, and the conversation around diversity is very much in a one-dimensional construct. For example, somebody would say, well, you know, the panel wasn't very diverse today because it only had, you know, one of this or one of that or one of the other. And for me and for the Army, that really doesn't get to the essence of diversity, because we very much see diversity as a value driver. What do we mean by that? It means that you know, as a value driver, it helps us to drive employee engagement by really looking at systems and barriers that to equitable outcomes for all of our workforce. To go a little bit further, we in the Army want to start a new conversation around diversity. We see diversity beyond the visual to the value, where we are leveraging diversity of talent, of skill sets, experiences, and I could go on to really help the Army solve complex problems. There are a lot of challenges that face readiness. There are a lot of challenges that face the world. As an example, we are actually in a COVID virtual environment right now. How do we get at challenges like that? Well, we get at challenges like that by leveraging talent. And it requires experiences of talents, cultures, et cetera, to get at those problems. Last thing I would say is that it's a little bit intuitive if we were to go to a financial planner, and that financial planner said to us, well, we need to diversify our portfolio. We kind of get that. However, in a workforce, we kind of think about diversity in a very different way. And so for us, we want to get back to where diversity is that value driver, where people come to us because of the talents and the skills that they bring to help to drive the Army into the 21st century and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beach. So, Mr. Formica, what role do you see for the Army Civilian Corps in multi-domain operations?
Thanks, Ellen. That's a great question. And you know, our Army Civilian Corps of nearly 300,000 is foundational to Army readiness. And as we all know, as our Army expands and contracts, it is the Army Civilian Corps that is leading through business processes those activities. But I think it's also important to recognize that our Army Civilian Corps has a role to play in the competitive space beyond its ability to manage the business of the Army. And NDA, the National Defense Strategy of 2018 laid this out for us. It said, seek ways to better utilize your civilian forces to be able to, frankly, free up your uniformed members to be able to only do the tasks that soldiers, airmen, sailors, Marines, et cetera, can do. And that's how we see it here in Training and Doctrine Command and the Army University. And that's why when I described in my remarks our efforts to really look at multi-domain operations and build curriculum that will begin, frankly, as a pilot for all the cohorts to expand our understanding and awareness of those things that we see in multi-domain operations, those things such as cyber operations, machine learning, artificial intelligence, data analytics, etc., and build that into the civilian corps so that the civilian corps, nearly 300,000, is able to assume some of those responsibility, again, freeing our soldiers to be able to perform only the tasks that soldiers can perform. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Formica. So, Ms. Burton, can you please tell us what some of the benefits are to the creation of ACCMA under CHARA?
Absolutely. So what we'll do with ACMA is we'll eliminate the existing 32 silos and group the career programs into 11 broader career fields. And this will better enable Army civilians to broaden their experience and developmental opportunities. So instead of separate career programs, for example, civilian HR, military HR, manpower, and EEO, we'll have one career field that includes human capital and resource management. Another example will combine IT and cyber to create a technology career field. We want a more nimble system to create opportunities for professional growth and advancement. We will increase efficiency through a holistic approach to talent management, and we'll leverage resources to provide quality career management support. Thanks, Ellen, for that question.
Thanks so much, Ms. Burton. So, Dr. Four, what are you seeing as the biggest challenge for the civilian implementation plan?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is the communication aspect of getting the word out that we have the civilian implementation plan. We have actions and tasks that we're tracking and metrics with those specific actions and tasks to get at what we're doing across the journey of the readiness for civilians. And so I can just use some COVID examples. We've done a lot with pre-employment drug testing. We've done a lot with onboarding. The CHARA has actually done an incredible job at doing virtual onboarding. And so we've got a number of tasks and actions associated with each one of those lines of efforts. In fact, Mike Formica just went over what we're doing with the supervisor course, and our goal is to make that a world-class supervisor's course and really target what the supervisor needs so they can actually have the right employee engagement. I think that what we're talking about as far as change management for the ACMA that Carol just went over is really important, that people begin to understand the value of what that organization is going to bring so that we can make data-based decisions so that we can use the big data that we've got. We can look at mission critical occupations, hard to fill locations. And I just give you an example for the medical community. The ability to pay relocation, retention, and loan repayment program for specific areas where they have a difficult time recruiting. Alaska, as an example. So I think that one of the biggest challenges is to communicate and to make sure that people understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and then more fundamentally what it means to them specifically. And so we are working very hard on our change management plan and our communication plan, and we understand that that's a parallel journey that we're making while we're putting the organization together. We're changing our processes. We're developing new processes. We're managing the budget that we have. We're asking for more money in the future so we can do more development and talent management. And so part of the challenge is, Ellen, that just the communication and making sure that everybody understands what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what it means to them. And then communicating to the supervisors out there as well, specifically the military supervisors of civilians. So our civilian corps is incredibly important to Army readiness. It is the critical piece that allows our combat soldiers to do their job. And so that is, I think, the biggest challenge that we have out there, Ellen. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Four. So, Mr. Beach, what is project inclusion?
Another fantastic question. So before I answer that question, I would say that there's a lot of literature out there and a lot of data that talks about diverse teams. And it says that diverse teams are a lot more innovative, they're higher performing, and they also are a lot more creative than just homogeneous teams. And so it gets us to what is project inclusion. So project inclusion really is the framework that operationalizes the diversity, equity, and inclusion annex to the Army People Strategy. It then looks at how we then communicate that to the total force. You know, how does someone understand how that annex applies to them? We talked about how we create, we look at Army culture and how we use that as a driver towards cohesive teams. And so under this project inclusion umbrella, what we're doing is really listing out all those different tasks and those initiatives that fall under the diversity, equity, and inclusion annex to the Army People Strategy, and really getting that out to the total force so that everybody understands what the diversity means to the Army, what the different initiatives that the Army is undertaking, and what is their role in those different initiatives. Just as an example, next week we would be at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and we would be at Fort Bragg and we'd be conducting listening sessions. Why do we want to conduct listening sessions? Because we could formulate plans. However, we need to hear from the workforce so that they understand, we could understand what it means to them, how they're vested in the plans that we're developing, and what they see as some of the solutions to the challenges that we currently face. We would then bring those answers back and decide how we need to revise current policy, how we need to adapt, or do we need to create new policies to address some of the challenges that we are facing at a macro level and maybe at a micro level as well. So just to sum that up, project inclusion really is the approach that we are taking to ensure that the total force understands what the initiatives are that we are engaging on and how we are operationalizing the diversity, equity, and inclusion annex under the Army People Strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Beach. So, Mr. Formica, is the Army pursuing career longitudinal assessments for members of the Army Civilian Corps like it does for the profession of arms?
Well, Helen, yeah, and I briefly touched on this in my remarks, so let me amplify those at this point. First of all, we think fundamental to leader development is a leader's appreciation of his or her knowledge, skills, and behaviors. And therefore, what we're going to do is, from the basic course through the advanced course, we're going to be implementing, delivering to our students a series of tests that will enable them to better appreciate, their reading ability, their writing ability, their communication skills, their critical thinking skills, their social abilities as well as part of what it is to be a leader. And the longitudinal aspect of this is a leader will understand his or her strengths at a point in time. As I mentioned, we're going to offer an opportunity through a cognitive improvement center. It'll start virtually for them to be able to reach out and find ways to improve those weaknesses and sustain their strengths. And then when they come back for the intermediate course, there's another dipstick that will be able to determine if they'll be able to determine, and that's the key thing, they'll be able to determine if they have improved, and so on and so forth throughout their career, so that at the end of this, the outcome we seek is a leader inside of our civilian corps that has a firm understanding of how well they are doing, seeks to improve themselves, and most importantly, is contributing to Army readiness in the way they lead their organization. So, yeah, this is really, really big, and we're excited to do it, and it'll be coming to all our courses this fiscal year. Thanks for giving me a chance to further expound upon that question.
Great insight, Mr. Formica. Thank you. So, Ms. Burton, you mentioned that this transformation creates significant opportunities for professional growth and advancement. Can you please elaborate on this?
Sure. So an important part of retaining our workforce is ensuring that they see a future within the Army. And today, many of our civilians can't see a clear path to an advancement. The work we're doing to transform career management will change that. We want a level playing field. We're building career paths now that span several related functional areas. I already mentioned 2 examples, human capital and resource management and technology, but here's another example. Supply, transportation, and ammo will all be in one logistics career field. Civilians will now have a means to develop their skills and be equipped to take on challenging new assignments in related functional areas, building multifunctional leaders for the Army while providing more advancement options for civilians. It's a really exciting time for Army civilians. Thanks, Ellen.
Oh, such a great response. But thank you again to all our participants, our key speaker, Dr. Rudinsky, our panelists, Dr. Four, Mr. Beach, Mr. Formica, and Ms. Burton, for participating today, for sharing your wealth and your knowledge, and for what you do every day to help our United States Army. Additionally, I want to thank all our viewers who participated today and attended our virtual Army Civilian Forum. I hope you have found this discussion interesting and informative. Now, if you like what AUSA is doing or want to know more about what AUSA is doing in support of Army civilians and you aren't an AUSA member, please consider joining our team in AUSA and become a member today. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and have a great day.